My next guest is a devout Brisbane-born Christian pacifist. In a life dedicated to protest, he's been jailed for disarming warplanes, dismantling uranium mining machinery and performing exorcisms of warships. To some, he's an inspiration, to others a criminal. Currently awaiting trial for an attack on a US bomber in Ireland in 2003, please welcome Kieran O'Reilly. Kieran, welcome.
Thank you.
In 1991, you were part of a group that attacked a US warplane in Griffis in New York State in America, Griffis Air Force Base. And it was an attack that was 9 months in the preparation. What sort of planning do you have to do for that action?
On that occasion, a New Zealand woman who's now a barrister, Moana Cole, and Bill and Sue Frankelstreit, we were all living in a community in Washington, DC, living with homeless women and children. And we came to the conclusion that we couldn't just keep doing that when the government was about to create a lot more homelessness and death in Iraq. So we began to go on retreats every fortnight to kind of secret locations and began to prepare a community that could disarm a weapon of mass destruction and take all the consequences of that, whether it be criminalisation and imprisonment or hysterical parents or whatever would follow. And we spent quite a few nights outside the base itself. It was a base that had won the security award for the US Air Force that year. And then we just did our homework, said our prayers and set off into the base. And Bill and Sue were able to get through 3 fences that were censored and begin to disarm the bomber by hammering on it. The bomber was nuclear armed. It was on 20-minute scramble alert. And Moana and I entered the other end of the runway and we poured across in human blood and spray painted "No more bombing of children, Hiroshima, Vietnam, the Middle East or anywhere else." It began to take up the runway.
Didn't anybody notice you were doing this?
Well, yeah, it's by 6:18, Bill and Sue are under armed arrest and the whole base is on alert and they're actually detaining people jogging past the base doing their morning exercises. And Moana and I run in the middle of the runway, taking up the runway symbolically and actually. And on 6 occasions, the security vehicle just sped by, so we'd put the hammer, pick up the hammer and get back to work again. So it wasn't until 7:30 that an air traffic controller came up the runway doing a daily check. And we said, you know, thank God you're here. It's a pretty ambitious project, taking up this whole runway. And we put it to him that he could join us or, you know, to go along, to get along, prepare in this terrible war that was coming up. And he told us to keep our hands visible and not move. So we then began to read the scripture of the day, and in the Catholic tradition, New Year's Day is the World Day of Peace. So the scripture happened to be the swords into plowshares prophecy and also to love your enemies, which one would think would imply not incinerating their children. And as we were doing this, 2 more vehicles came speeding along the runway. Young men in military fatigues with M16s came running at us and screaming at us to get on the ground or they'd blow our heads off. So we thought it's probably a good time to get on the ground. And we were spread-eagled and the guy kicked me and then he hit me in the head with his gun and said, "Say a word and I'll blow your head off." And then he asked me a question, which is kind of like a no-win situation. And he said, "Where are your bombs?" And I just looked up to him and said, "Look, mate, you've got the bombs, that's why we're here." And there are literally 200 nuclear weapons on that base. You know.
I'm willing to bet they were runners-up the next year for most secure base.
Well, yeah. At the end of the Cold War, they decided to downsize. They had about 6 B-52 bases in Guam and Louisiana, and they decided to close this base. And they actually had the Woodstock Festival in 1999 on this empty base. So it was quite a kind of fulfilment of the prophecy, really.
You refer to what you do as assertive non-violence. In what way is smashing something up non-violent?
Right. In the past, say the Catholic worker movement would have had a conscientious objection position. That is, if they wanted your young men to conscript them, we would refuse to go or would burn our draft cards in the 1960s. But the nature of warfare has changed. It's changed into low-intensity conflict where you train other nationalities to do the killing and dying for you, or you hit them with high-tech overkill, bombing them from 30,000 feet. So it doesn't require your firstborn child as much. So this development brought more kind of liturgically based actions where we'd go out in a spirit of non-violence to these places of death where the weapons were being constructed or young men being trained and intervene non-violently.
I'm intrigued as you're talking to me. You're not looking at me particularly, you're looking down there. Are you particularly nervous or is this how you process this?
I think I'm not sure whether I'm at trial. Usually, the prosecutor addresses you, and then you turn to the jury and you talk. So it might be a bit of a technique left over from trial.
Is that right?
But I've just met you too. Nervous, yeah.
Trust me, I'm the media.
It's funny in prison you learn this, because I spent 2 years in prison, and you do pick up the skill of holding a gaze long enough to show you're not intimidated, but not too long that you're eyeballing someone. So it's kind of an interesting thing, the whole eye contact. Yeah.
In 1988 here in Sydney, you exorcised the USS New Jersey, a warship, again by sprinkling blood on it and other ceremonies. Now, exorcism is a strong word in Western culture. It's freighted with a lot of meaning. Do you worry that people might not think you're a little crazy?
Well, words are difficult. You know, words even like, obviously, being a Christian takes a lot of explaining, especially to Muslims who remember the Crusades, or, you know, to be an anarchist. Or an exorcism is, if you look at the life of Christ, it's basically what he does is call a community together, practices the acts of mercy, feeds the hungry, shelters the homeless, etc. But the other thing he does is the exorcisms, which is confronting the principalities and powers, the governments and corporations of his day, who caused poverty and death and war. So what we did was we went on board the USS New Jersey, and it was a day where literally thousands of children were being brought onto this battleship to celebrate it as a tourist attraction. And this is a battleship that has killed children in Vietnam, had killed children in Lebanon, and had enough nuclear weapons on board to kill a lot more children. So we poured human blood on it, symbolic of the blood it had spilled in Vietnam and Lebanon, and the blood it threatened to spill. And we carried out the rite of exorcism, naming it for what it is and saying it has no hold over us. And that seemed to do the trick. They were pretty upset by that.
But getting back to the question before that, does it worry that people will look at this and think it's just crazy? I think we have what we're called to do is we're called to act and witness to the truth, and then there's a responsibility to explain what we've done. But you know, we can be presented by the mainstream media in ways that will make us look crazy or demonise us or say we're a serious security threat to people in Australia or whatever. I mean, we really have no control over that. So it concerns me that we are misunderstood, and I try and do as much as possible to avoid that. Have you thought of adopting more the method the Greens have taken, for instance, which is to address to wear the dress and the hair and the mode of broader society to more easily open the lines of communication?
I mean, we don't all look like this. We don't, you know, a lot of our people are grandparents and priests and nuns.
No, but talking about you.
Yeah, myself.
Yes.
In terms of my hair. I guess the reason I have this kind of hair, and it's in a sense, it's a kind of move into self-exile from the mainstream culture.
I'm not obsessed about your hair.
Right,
I couldn't give a rat's about dreadlocks, except to say, if you want to seriously communicate this message, aren't you putting a stumbling block between yourself and the people you're trying to reach?
Well, a lot of people say to me on the same basis, why do you stay a Catholic if you want to be taken seriously, especially in Ireland now, the big backlash. And everyone's got to do their bit. Like, I'm not going to save everyone. I'm not going to stop the war by myself. And it's good to be sceptical of what people... You know, I hope people are sceptical of what I'm saying and actually explore the issues a lot more deeper than listening to me. But no, I think... yeah, that's a question I'll have to keep revisiting. Is it an ego thing or whatever? You know?
I'm surprised you haven't visited those. Somebody with your commitment that's about to potentially go to jail.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that you wouldn't be thinking in a very focused fashion.
Another thing it's always...
how do I make this sacrifice the most effective?
Another thing it does is keep the conflict with my mother on a very superficial level. Like, if it wasn't the hair, it'd be something a bit more significant.
What else could you have done in your life that you would be worried about?
That's right. And, you know... So, you know, I don't think we're going to get acquitted or convicted on the basis of my hairstyle.
No. Yeah. From the days of Joe's street march ban, you know, through Jabiluka, Bogo Road Jail, Indonesians in East Timor, the British in East Timor, the World Economic Forum, you've been arrested over 50 times. I think you've probably lost count. and it's a very diverse range of things that you've protested. Is a part of you addicted to the idea of protest?
I haven't been arrested in 3.5 years now. I've been on bail. It's the most well-behaved I've been. I think, especially at a time now in a country that is at war, has troops deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq, that gives Pine Gap to target cruise missile attacks for the Americans in Iraq. One has to be at some kind of tension with their government, whether it's preparing for an action, whether it's acting, or whether it's being before the courts, or whether it's being in jail. That's how I'd read the situation. I see it as maybe an occupational hazard for a Christian in the first world. We have more room to move here, and we should be using that. So.
In the eyes of the law and in many people's eyes watching tonight, you've acted criminally on different occasions. How do you rationalise that?
Yeah, I mean, I was detained by ASIO when I landed here in February at Brisbane Airport. That was interesting. I'd say if you read the Acts of the Apostles, you notice that Jesus was arrested and executed. 11 of the 12 apostles were arrested and executed. But in the Acts of the apostles were always in and out of court. So it's kind of strange that it's seen as unusual. It's what is strange to me is that how disengaged people are in Australia while their country is at war, is complicit in killing 150,000 Iraqis at the moment. It's very strange.
Let's talk about what happened at Ciaron, which was a couple of years ago. Again, you broke into the Air Force Base, disabled a B-52 bomber.
No, it was a US Navy warplane.
US Navy warplane, yeah. Put it out of action for a couple of months. And, you know, for that, you stand accused of $2.5 million damage, and you could go to jail for up to 10 years. You waited around to be arrested. Why was it important to do that?
Well, we stay and pray rather than hit and split. And we don't wait to be arrested, we wait to invite people into the disarmament, whether they be police or security or military. And unfortunately, you know, so far we've been arrested and taken to jail.
What, you expected them to come and join you and say, you know what, that's okay?
That's right. Because in Ireland, the police are actually, in Gaelic, they're called the Garda Síochána, which is the guardians of the peace. So one would assume that they'd join in a peacemaking action. But unfortunately, they didn't, and we were handcuffed and taken to Limerick prison. And at my first bail appearance, the judge looked at my record and said, I'm not giving you any bail. You're too passionate to be on the streets during a time of war. And I thought, if I can't get a date in Ireland after that recommendation, I'm in real trouble. And after a few weeks, they did give us bail, and we had to sign on every day at a police station for a year to make sure we weren't moving too far from Dublin. And we were banned from near the airport and banned from near the US Embassy.
What about the actions of Osama bin Laden or al-Zarqawi or those people? Do you protest those, or is that up to others?
No, I mean, say with Saddam Hussein, I used to write my Amnesty International letters to Saddam in the 80s while the British and Americans were arming him and the Irish were selling him beef on credit so his army could invade Iran. I had a very consistent position on Saddam Hussein. With the bin Laden group, it's quite interesting because these aren't some kind of Maoists from the hills of Peru. These are people that used to work for the United States in Afghanistan and had turned on them. And it's very, you know, I think, as Chomsky would say, you've got wholesale and retail terror. And dropping napalm from 30,000 feet or planting a car bomb in a street, to me, is ethically the same. You know, it's just a question of magnitude and technology, really. So, you know, I think what we need to do is to confront our own sins, you know, especially as Catholics and Australians and Americans, and hope that people in the Islamic tradition are confronting their baggage and history and the people who are misusing their name, just like George Bush is, you know, misusing Christ. I mean, who would Jesus bomb? You know, would Jesus be dropping napalm? You
said before you were alarmed at how disengaged people in this country are from what's happening in Iraq and our complicity in it. How effective do you think the actions of the Ploughshares group, the sort of actions you've taken, and the time you might spend in a monastic sense in a jail, how effective do you think they are in engaging that broader population?
I do think it's a spiritual question about why people aren't responding to the war or the ecological catastrophe we're on the verge of, or the very strong possibility that nuclear weapons will be used in the next few months on Iran. And most people know it's wrong, and most people know it's disgusting, but there's an incredible sense of resignation in the culture and an atomisation. And so that spiritual emphasis to me is the most significant. You know, I'm still working on my own response as a human being to this war. It's not, I don't think I've arrived and I'm trying to tell people be like me. I'm still struggling with, you know, given that there's 1,100 young Americans going through Shannon Airport each day willing to risk their legs, their arms, their lives, their sanity to prosecute this war, what kind of serious non-violent peacemaking will it take to resist that, and what kind of price people will pay? And in some ways my family is being disrupted in the serious peacemaking the same way a lot of military families in Australia are being disrupted by having their young men and women sent off to Iraq or Afghanistan. And I think we parts of the peace movement will have to pay that kind of serious price equivalent to what soldiers pay to wage war.
Here's a question you may well have asked yourself in jail, or you may yet. What if there is no God?
I think someone said, I'd like to live a life which would be totally ridiculous if there was no God. So I think I'm on track on that one. Yeah, God is, I mean, it's an act of faith. It's not completely rational. And God, of course, is Yahweh, the name that cannot be spoken, impossible to define. As soon as you begin defining God, you enter the area of idolatry. There's the old saying of God created man in his image and man returns the favour, you know. So it's all incredible mystery, and the mystery of what we're doing here in the first place, and we're not going to be here for long, is a big existential mystery for everyone, you know.
For you, you have the answer, don't you? It's not an existential mystery.
I believe in God, yeah, and I believe that life will triumph, and that might be after a totally destroyed ecology, and that might be after nuclear war, but I believe that life will triumph, and that part of living my life, being fully human, is resisting these systems of death and these principalities and powers that put human life second to, you know, profit and property and power. So you don't look convinced.
No. I don't need to be convinced.
I'm not trying to convince you.
It's been very interesting to meet you. Kieran O'Reilly, thank you.
Thank you very much.